Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. I am not Alec. Either that or I'm Alec and I shaved off my mustache. No, I'm not really Alec. He's somewhere around Chicago. We don't know where, but I think he'll be back next week. So I'm going to be your substitute host tonight. And tonight we have a special guest, one of our regulars. Oh, I guess she's not special, but she's going to tell us all about her trip down to Chile to watch the eclipse. And she's also going to tell us who took care of the cat while she was gone. So my wife asked that question, so I'm asking it. Before we do that, I'm not going to go over too much more before we get Molly started. But Arno, you're all set for next week in Gorgeous Galaxies. She has a nice little video. You want to say a few words about that? She's also going to tell us who took care of the cat. Arno?
Yep.
Oh, you want to say a few words about Gorgeous Galaxies for next week? Okay, well, let's just jump ahead. Arno has put together a really fine video of all the images that you have sent in, and it's going to be part of our program for next week. And we're going to have a couple more short presentations. I think I've covered it, Arno, so we're going to have short presentations about
everybody.
I think Arno's on some kind of really long delay or something.
I think we've covered it, Arno, but we thank you very much. So next week we're going to have the Gorgeous Galaxies video, and we're going to have a couple of maybe 15-minute presentations. I'm going to do one on multi-level tone mapping for those of you who do Hubble palette images and narrow band. And Tim's going to do another presentation. You want to give us a little preview of that, Tim?
Sure. After the tone map in the Hubble palette, then you need to find a way to bring out the detail. And so I'm going to talk about taking the next step after what Eric discusses and how we use HA and some other things to bring up the detail in those Hubble palette images.
Okay, I think that's about it. You know, we are always looking for presenters, so anyone out there that has an idea for a subject they'd like to cover, perhaps we don't, or would like to suggest a friend or someone you know that might give a presentation, you know, please go to our website and put in a note to us, and one of us will get back to you and put you on the program. We have a couple of open spots a little bit later on, I think in about a month, and we'd love to have some new people with different ideas come to the program. And now we're going to go to, what is it, South America, Molly, and your trip down there. So this is a place where we get to look straight up and we get to see the Milky Way as it's really designed to be seen.
Yeah, it was really weird seeing the parts of the Milky Way that are normally near the horizon be up high in the sky and all kinds of other stuff, you know, things that are ho-hum for Terry and Arno, but super exciting for for me. So let me share my screen. What's this stuff? And start my presentation. All right, cool. Yeah, so I got to go to Chile back in 2019, and yeah, it's a little ways ago now, but with the pandemic, it's almost like 2019 still, you know. It's like 2020 never happened, right? So, but I want to talk about my trip down there, the observing I got to do, the things I got to see, the solar eclipse, and all the places that I went to, so that because I'm recommending that you also try and make this trip, because it was really incredible, and everybody should get to see the Southern Hemisphere at some point. And Chile is a little more easily accessible than Australia for those of us who live in North America. So here's some places you can go. So first question is, why Chile? Why choose Chile among the nations in South America? And one of those reasons is actually that Chile has it's really good infrastructure, and they pride themselves on being one of the more well-developed South American countries. And it was definitely not too difficult to get around Chile even for the group of us that, like, I had the most Spanish in the group, and I've had like 2 years of high school and 2 years of college Spanish, plus some refresher on Duolingo. I would not say that my Spanish is great. And we didn't have too much trouble getting around. So, and of course, from the astronomy standpoint, you have these southern skies. So we've got all kinds of stuff down in the southern hemisphere that we can't see from here, like the Magellanic Clouds and the more southerly parts of the Milky Way, like more Centaurus and the Southern Cross and all the other Eta Carina and all the other really cool constellations that are below the horizon for us northerners. You've got the reason why there's so many major telescopes that are built in Chile is because of the clear skies of the desert, high altitude, and then of course being able to see like a lot of the whole span of the Milky Way. There's some kind of more northerly targets that are a little harder to reach, like the Andromeda Galaxy and whatnot. But the northern part of Chile, I was up at around 29, 27 degrees north latitude. You're far enough north to be able to actually still get an appreciable amount of northern targets, in addition to all of the glorious southern targets. So there's a lot of stuff to explore in the sky there. And in the case of July 2019, you had the solar eclipse that went across South America. So you can see here that this very, very long coastal country, the whole country had some part of the eclipse. And then a good chunk of it got totality. It's a nice wide totality, and many, many people flocked down there for the solar eclipse. So we were down there. Sorry, my phone is buzzing like crazy. Let me mute that real quick. Okay. So we were down there for 2 weeks, and part of that included a couple of days in Santiago, a week in La Serena, which is where we saw the solar eclipse. And then we took a road trip up to the small town of San Pedro de Atacama, where we stayed in the Atacama Desert to do some high altitude, dark sky, very clear sky astronomy up in the Atacama Desert, which was unforgettable. So first I want to talk about my gear loadout, because when you're flying somewhere to do astronomy, you have to be really thoughtful about what you're going to take with you, because if you try to take all of your kind of bigger gear, that's really expensive and can be really difficult to do when flying down there. And so I had to kind of really plan out what I was going to take with me to be able to take advantage of both the solar eclipse and the dark sky astrophotography that I wanted to do. The hotel we stayed at in the Atacama Desert, which I'll get to, had lots of visual observing telescopes. So mainly I just needed to bring something for my astrophotography stuff. So there were several constraints that I had in my mind when I was planning this gear loadout. And first of all, it needed to be airline packable. I wasn't going to try and ship stuff down there for that kind of timeline and deal with customs and all that stuff. So I needed something that I could put into a suitcase and check. And some stuff was going to come with me in the airplane, mainly the more expensive bits, the cameras and my my capture computer. So that ruled out most of the traditional mounts and telescopes, of course. So what I ended up bringing was my Skywatcher Star Adventurer, which is like a smallish star tracker. There are smaller ones. Like I also brought my Vixen Polary with me as a backup. But the Skywatcher Star Adventurer, the whole thing fits inside of a like camera lens backpack that's about foot and a half long, and fits nicely inside of actually a carry-on sized suitcase. So I brought that and all of its cables and backup batteries and solar spotters and all my little bits and pieces, plus the Vixen Polary as backup. And I brought 3 cameras with me. I brought my ZWO ASI 1600mm Pro, which was my only astronomy specific camera at the time, my cooled CMOS camera. And I brought both of my DSLRs, mainly partly so I could have one as backup, and partly so that when we got out to the dark sky site, then I could have multiple rigs running, which is what I always like to do. If you have seen me at the Texas Star Party, you know what I'm talking about. I usually have as many rigs running as I have cameras to support. So as far as the tripod went, I got a carbon fiber tripod that folds up to be about 2 feet long, that weighed very little, and I could fit pretty easily inside of the same carry-on suitcase that I had the camera gear in. And I did carry it on because I also had lots of lithium-ion batteries I needed to power all of my stuff, which you can't check in baggage that goes into the plane. So when I was going through security, flying out of the Dayton airport, they actually pulled my bag out because all of the metal in there was basically a black hole on the X-ray scanner. So they wanted to see what in the heck I had in this bag. So I had no issues once they opened it up and I explained what was in there. But yeah, it probably looked pretty weird coming through the X-ray scanner. But yeah, it wasn't really a big deal. And I didn't bring a telescope. I don't at the moment have a small telescope like a Red Cat, or I used to have a Borg 76 millimeter that I have passed on to someone else. So I brought my 70 to 300 millimeter Nikon camera lens and my 50 to 200 millimeter Nikon camera lens. I did not yet have my Rokinon 135 millimeter, which is what I would bring now. But the 70 to 300 millimeter is not great for stars, but was going to be good for the solar eclipse just because it has a fair amount of chromatic aberration. Yep, so this is the lenses. I also brought, I have a 35 millimeter f 1.8 that I brought for just really cool wide field shots of the Milky Way that I'll show later on. Yeah, the other essential is the intervalometer. So I did run with a computer, which I think I have on my next picture here. But having the intervalometer is helpful for my secondary and tertiary camera setups, where I can use the computer to run my primary rig, and then I can have the intervalometer controlling one of my DSLRs that's just doing, like, you know, capturing the solar eclipse wide field or doing time lapse and stuff like that. I brought several lithium-ion battery packs, and instead of bringing my laptop, I ended up bringing my tablet instead. And I've been using my my Microsoft Surface 3, not the Pro, just the Surface 3, which is getting a little harder to find used these days. But a small Windows Surface tablet, because I could actually run all my, I have been running my image acquisition software on the tablet successfully for a long time. It's got USB 3. It doesn't, you know, image acquisition does not require a lot of horsepower, so it worked out great. Plus, I could power it on the lithium batteries because it ran on 5-volt power. So that worked out really nicely. Because the other thing you have to consider is the potential for loss, for your stuff getting stolen. And that also is kind of what drove the decision for what gear that I brought with me. And I decided not to bring my laptop at all and just process all my images after I got home, because my tablet, well, it's good for acquisition, not great for processing. So here is the Skywatcher Star Adventurer all set up, and I have 2 cameras loaded on it going at the same time on 2 different targets, which is one of the cool things about using a star tracker, this one in particular. And so that was a lot of fun to be able to utilize one mount for multiple cameras going at the same time. Yeah, so the first couple days we were in Santiago, which is the capital of Chile, and we were just there for a couple days before we caught our flight down to La Serena, but we decided to utilize that time to go explore some of the historic downtown area. We went to a pre-Columbian art museum and sampled a lot of the local fare, lots and lots of fish, being a largely coastal nation. Also tried some South American classics like lingua, or cow's tongue, which I've had before, but never quite in such a still like has taste buds on its state. So the texture did throw me off a little bit, but you know, it's an experience you got to have, right? And then of course, lots and lots of pisco sours. Pisco is it's a type of brandy from what I was reading, or it's like related to it somehow. It's a liquor, and it's really a specialty. Both Peru and Chile claim to be the home of the pisco sour. And having been to both countries, I have to say that I like the ones in Chile better. But they both take a lot of pride in owning the pisco sour, which is pisco sour and egg white foam on the top, and it's like the national drink. It's pisco's everywhere. One of the sites that we saw in Santiago was this tram called the funicular that went to the top of this massive hill in the city, where you could go overlook the city, and had some spiritual and religious sites up on the top, which was really neat, and really gave you quite an impressive view of Santiago. And you could see a lot of the haze of pollution hanging over, and it was also cloudy the whole weekend that we were there. So after being in Santiago for a couple days, we flew down to La Serena, which is a town on the coast. Or I guess I say down, I really mean up north to La Serena. It's a town on the coast. They have a lot of beach. This is a historic lighthouse that was unfortunately under renovation, so we didn't get to go see it. But it's a little bit of a touristy town. There's lots of stuff to go see there, and they have their own airport, so it was not too difficult to get into. We stayed at a hostel type hotel called the Hostal El Punto, which it's only a couple blocks from the city center, and it was a hostel that it still had individual rooms, but like a shared kind of like living space, and they had a kitchen there that cooked breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and it was just a really tiny little spot that we booked, I think, like 2 years in advance, and kept calling to double check once they kind of realized that the eclipse was coming, that we were still going to have our rooms for the really cheap rates that we got. And yeah, that was a really excellent place to stay. It was so pretty and really easy to get to the downtown area of La Serena from there, just walking. And we got our first peek at the southern sky while we were there, which, of course, it being in town, fair amount of light pollution. But with this longish exposure from my DSLR on a tripod, probably like 15 seconds, you could just see the Milky Way pop out, which is really exciting. So here's a shot with where I did a little bit of light pollution reduction to kind of further see the Milky Way. I'm going to flip back to the slide because it's got my notes on it. We got our first glimpse at some of the southern sky target gems that you have to see when you're in the southern hemisphere. The Southern Cross, Alpha Centauri, and then we used some binoculars that we brought to spot Omega Centauri, the really incredibly huge globular cluster. The Jewel Box cluster, we actually did see Eta Carina from the city, and with the binoculars, it's kind of a fuzzy splotch, but we found it. And we stumbled across the Southern Pleiades, which is another open cluster that kind of reminds one of the Pleiades. Really, the kind of wild part was seeing Scorpius and the teapot upside down, which was weird. And Jupiter and Saturn were up at zenith instead of being down low the horizon, which was really cool. And Arc to Arcturus and Spike to Spica were reversed. It was totally wild. And spotted some of the southern sky constellations like Pavo, Volans, and Lupus. So our first night in light pollution was a good success. We did some daytime trips. Went up to Elqui Valley. I guess I should mention that the group I went with were some friends from my astronomy club here in Dayton, Ohio, as well as some of their friends who used to be club members here and now live out west. And so we went. Elqui Valley is a place where they make a lot of pisco. They have a lot of distilleries up there. So we went up to one of the distilleries and enjoyed some dinner and enjoyed some pisco sours. And all of the businesses, everywhere we went, everybody was really hyped about the solar eclipse. So a lot of businesses were putting out special solar eclipse products. So for example, this distillery we went to put out a special solar eclipse pisco, which was pretty cool to celebrate the upcoming solar eclipse. And when I say news about the eclipse was everywhere, it was absolutely everywhere. as good as the news got out in the U.S. about the 2017 eclipse here, everybody in Chile was going to know about the solar eclipse. There was a huge campaign because there's so much professional astronomy that goes on down there that all the news media outlets were sharing as much information as possible, and the local governments were really getting on board, and it was just absolutely everywhere. So La Serena was one of the towns that the totality was going to be going right over. So there was lots of signage around town about it. They had a big festival a couple of days beforehand. The grocery stores were printing information about it on their grocery bags and like places to go see the eclipse. It was even painted onto trash cans. It was just everybody knew it was coming. Every single man, woman, and child in that country knew it was coming, and it worked its way so much into the what was just kind of what was going on in daily life that we were watching a soccer game between a World Cup game between Colombia and Chile, and this says Colombia failed to eclipse the red, which is the Chilean national team, with eclipse in quotes, again reference to the upcoming solar eclipse. While we were up in Elqui Valley, we went up to we were ultimately unable to book any professional observatory tours. Part of that being that a lot of the professional observatories reserved a lot of their tours for locals because there was so much hype about the eclipse and they really wanted to service the local population. So we ultimately weren't able to get a tour at professional observatory. So we did swing by an observatory that's like an outreach observatory called the Mamayuca Observatory, and we ended up setting up out in a parking lot a little bit down the road to do some dark sky astronomy up in the Vicuña area, which is where we could see Cerro Tololo across the valley on the other side, way off on the mountain, which is a really big observatory that a lot of astronomers have probably heard of. So then we got our first glimpse at a dark sky from up there. So here's the Milky Way rising over one of the hills, and we brought our binoculars and cameras, and we're taking all kinds of pictures and kind of got our first look from a dark sky place at what we were gonna, some of the southern sky wonders. So Altair is down here, kind of low in the sky, and Vega, which is not in the picture here, is even lower in the sky, which was wild to see Vega low in the sky, which for me is normally at zenith in the summertime. And I got better looks at Eta Carina and the Coalsack Nebula and all the other stuff that we saw in town, but from darker skies, and Jupiter and Mars as well, which was a lot of fun. Oh, and we got our first glimpse of the Large Magellanic Cloud, which was also very exciting.
Molly, was that a single frame?
Yes.
That's a single frame. It's not a comp.
That's a single shot, yeah. Probably about a 15-second exposure with my, actually, no, that one's probably 10 or 12 seconds with my 35 millimeter f1.8.
Terrific. I have one other question.
Yeah.
Do you know what the best time of year to make a trip to Chile would be?
So we were down there in July, which in the Southern Hemisphere is the winter time. But at that, La Serena's up at like, what was it, like 32 north latitude. So it was not really cold and it wasn't like snowy or anything. So winter up in the more northerly latitudes of Chile was actually pretty decent, because that's when the Milky Way is when we have the summertime, what we call the summertime Milky Way. Is the wintertime Milky Way for them. So that's what I would recommend going, actually, is over the course of the Southern Hemisphere winter, because that's when you have the Milky Way and all of its awesomeness.
Terrific. Thanks.
Yeah. One of our other daytime trips, we took a short break from the nighttime things to prep ourselves for the solar eclipse, and we went to the Humboldt Penguin Reserve. That far north, yes, only 30 degrees below the equator, there's a place where penguins live. And that's because there's a really cold current that goes along the coast in the Pacific Ocean so there's a type of penguin that lives up there. These are not penguins, of course, but I've got some pictures of penguins coming up in the slides here. We went on a boat tour of some of these protected islands just off the coast of La Serena. So it's another really fun thing to do while out there. And so really cool looking penguins, got some really up close shots of dolphins. This is a gorgeous bird called a cormorant, and it just had really bright, awesome colors, and yeah, all kinds of birds. Closer up of penguins. The penguins are really fun to see. And finally, on July 2nd, it was time for it was the day of the solar eclipse. And even though it was not going to be until 4:39 in the afternoon, we were up really early to get our day started. We had thought about finding a spot on our own, but we actually ended up being really happy with the tour company that we booked the Humboldt Reserve tour with, and unfortunately did not put the name of the company in my slides. I can go look that up after the talk if anybody's interested in knowing what the name of the company was. So we actually ended up booking their eclipse trip as well, because they were going to have a whole site set up and provide the transportation out there. And so we weren't going to have to try and figure out where to go. So we were up at about 5, 6 in the morning to get ready for this afternoon eclipse. And after a drive up about an hour and a half north to La Higuera, which is this little village that suddenly became a very big village when thousands of people flocked to the area right around just this tiny, tiny village to witness a solar eclipse. So the village was prepared for this, like most people in Chile were. But this is my solar imaging rig. So I have that was a Botter solar film inside of like a cardboard tube wrapped in tape and put on the front of my camera, so that not taped on, but I kind of had some foam in there so that I could take it on and off, but have it kind of stay steady for the partial phases and then take it off for totality. Polar alignment was a bit interesting because southern hemisphere, I'm pointing south, and the sun was moving across the north, which you kind of have to think about because you're used to the sun moving across the south, and having it move across the north was kind of wild. But I used a compass on my smartphone and an app that tells me like the angle that my phone is pointed to, and I kind of laid that on top of the Star Adventurer so that I could know what altitude my mount was pointed at, which I lined up with the latitude, of course. And for the solar eclipse not needing long exposures, having it be close enough was good enough and I just had to go adjust the position of the camera every 2 hours or so over the course of the day.
Molly, do you know whether you were on the center line where you were?
We were pretty close to it. We were, I'm trying to remember now. If we weren't on it, we were right on the edge. We were very close to it. Yeah, La Serena was a little further off of it. And being close to the ocean, they had a higher chance of getting clouds coming in. So a lot of people went up to this spot a little further back from the waterfront and a little higher altitude, and to prevent some of that sea fog from rolling in. And yeah, we had a nice clear day. But yeah, I think we were pretty close to the center line, if not right on it. Here's kind of the site that the tour company had set up. And they had barbecue going. They had some shady spots. They had some porta potties up there. It was really nicely set up, and there was a lot of locals who were in with the tour company, and then of course a lot of us foreigners there too. But really kind of a mixed crowd of people with a lot of locals there. Here's a wider view of the area, kind of brown, deserty brush. Even though we're pretty close to the ocean here, the desert really runs right along the ocean. There's a strong rain shadow because the mountains are so close to the water. So very kind of dry and brown and very clear skies. Some people, as you can see here, a lot of people were camping the night before to claim down some spots. the little tiny village of La Higuera had a whole art installation erected to celebrate the solar eclipse. So this is supposed to represent the black disk of the sun when the moon sits in front of it. And they had these enormous eclipse glasses with actual like material that was safe to look through, pointed at the angle up off the horizon the sun was going to be during totality, which was extremely cool. And finally, after a long morning of waiting and hanging around and having people come gawk at I was one of the only people there who had equipment set up. Most people were just there with their eyes and their solar glasses. So totality finally began. The blotter filter puts off a bit of a pink hue, but yeah, that's not the important part of the eclipse. There was no sunspots this time around, so I had to focus on the edge of the sun, but I managed to get pretty close despite that. While we were kind of waiting for things to get rolling, I ended up doing a lot of outreach, as I like to do. I was explaining in the best Spanish I could muster some of what was going to happen and what was physically what was going on, and pointing out different phenomena like looking at the crescent shadows through small holes in various objects I could find around the place. Like one woman had one of those folding cane chairs that had some air holes in the bottom, made the perfect little thing to cast a shadow onto the ground for seeing the crescent shadows. This young boy here, he saw my setup and was like, "Can you help me do that?" So he didn't have a solar filter for his camera, but we rigged one up using a spare pair of solar eclipse glasses and blocking out the rest of his lens with cardboard. Wasn't the ideal setup, but he was able to see the partial phases, and it only being an 18 millimeter lens, that's actually less than 1x magnification. So you don't really need the filter on there, but I felt better having him look through the viewfinder when we had the filter on there. So yeah, so he was pretty excited to be able to capture the parts of the partial phase. And then I reminded him to take it off during totality. Not sure he made it or not, but yeah. Finally, we got closer to totality. The sun was becoming a very thin disk. If you have not been to see a solar eclipse, this is right about, like, the whole time you would have no idea that anything was any different for almost the entirety of the partial phase. And this is why it's so important to be on the center line. 99% eclipse is 100% different than totality. It's and it's literally night and day, because it's in those final couple of seconds that it's like someone just turns out the lights and just everything plunges into darkness. But when you get to this really deep phase, the quality of the light does become very strange. It's like it's cloudy, but there's no clouds. Things just kind of become washed out and kind of gray, even though it's sunny out, and it's just the wildest thing. Then finally, we got very close to totality, and that's when I took off the solar filter. Now, part of the reason I brought the tablet was because I wanted to enjoy the eclipse, right? So I actually used a piece of software called Backyard Nikon, which there's a Canon version too called Backyard EOS. That it runs it's $50 for a lifetime license. And you can sequence it for a single target, kind of like how you might in Sequence Generator Pro, with a bazillion different exposure times. So building on a spreadsheet that I had built for the 2017 solar eclipse, which was almost the same length as the 2019 one, I had a very well-defined sequence of different exposure times for different parts of the eclipse. So I didn't have to touch it. I hit go on the partial phase, and then I swapped out for the totality phase script and hit go about 1 minute before totality, listening to the prompts on my phone, speaking out loud from the Eclipse Timer app. I just hit go, and then I didn't have to look at the camera or the computer at all. I was able to just take in the moment while my camera was clicking away without me having to do anything. And it took many hours of work to build that script, but it was worth it in the end, because I was able to enjoy the eclipse and not have to be trying to shoot my camera. So here's the shot of Bailey's beads, again, precisely timed using the data on Fred Espenak's website, Mr. Eclipse, who's got information on exposure times for different ISO values to use with your camera and to get the right exposures for these different phenomena. And finally, we had totality. So this is one of, probably think about 100 or so exposures I got during totality of different exposure times. Now, the sun was only about 13 degrees above the horizon for this one because we were getting pretty close to sunset. So it's a little more blurred than the 50, 55 degrees I had in 2017 in Casper. Plus, when I took off the solar filter, I had the focus set, but I did not have the zoom set like taped down on my lens. So I actually ended up pushing the lens in a tiny bit and being just a hair out of focus, but it actually ended up turning out pretty all right in the end. And after, I think it was 2 minutes, 42 seconds, something like that, then totality was over and we were getting the diamond ring again, which like I did in Wyoming, I did leave my eclipse glasses off for the diamond ring because seeing it visually, while slightly dangerous, is something to behold. And then shortly after that, I threw my glasses on and threw the solar filter back on my camera at some point before things started drying. So diamond ring. You could see, I love these shots right around second and third contact because you can see the chromosphere, and that's the actual color of the chromosphere. There's no solar filter in front of this. There's the actual hydrogen alpha color coming off the sun when you're only seeing the chromosphere because of how much light the moon is blocking. So I just love seeing that. It's super cool. I did take a couple of shots with my other DSLR with just like an 18mm lens on there, just to kind of, which I didn't do in 2017, just to kind of try and capture what the environment was like. And based on my memory, I picked some exposure times, going through the variety of exposure times I took without looking. This is approximately what my eyes saw as far as the brightness of the corona and the darkness of the sky, just how dark it was. And we had the 365 degrees 360 degree sunset all around. And did see, I think Venus was up and some brighter stars as well, which was really cool. And like I did for the 2017 eclipse, I made a composite image of several different exposure times that I took on my main rig with the long lens to be able to get a high dynamic range image of the corona. So, and actually, because we were at solar minimum in 2019, you can see here that the corona is very ordered, unlike the 2017 eclipse where it had kind of more shapes to it. So it's really interesting to see the differences in the magnetic field between those 2 years. And I'm expecting 2024 to have a very chaotic magnetic field. So really looking forward to getting some really cool shots out of that. And actually the sun set before the end of the partial phase. So that gave me an opportunity to get some really cool pictures of a partially eclipsed sun setting behind the hill. So that was super cool. And here's sunset, where you can't really see that it was still partially eclipsed, but I got some really cool shadows on the edge of the mountain. And then after the solar eclipse, it was time to pack up and make our way into the great South American traffic jam all the way back to La Serena. I think it took us, 4 or 5 hours. And we actually, everybody in the van, we actually kind of cheered on our van driver to do a very American thing that pretty much nobody else was doing, which was drive on the shoulder to pass lots of cars, which I absolutely hate when people do in the States, but it was kind of fun. And we made it back before midnight, which was nice. But yeah, it was a very, very long road. very, very long back to La Serena. All right, so that's the first part of the trip. The second part of the trip is heading up to the Atacama Desert for doing some deep sky astrophotography. So we drove up, we decided we had a rental car and we drove up the Pan American Highway from La Serena up through the Antofagasta region into Calama and then San Pedro de Atacama, which is a small town that is actually kind of a growing stargazing industry because of its proximity to the Atacama Desert, but still having, gasoline and stuff like that you can get there near the grocery stores. So on our way up, we actually swung by, it was right off the highway, the European Southern Observatory Paranal Observatory site, which is where the very large telescope was located, which is, you can see it above our heads in the background here. Again, we weren't able to actually go on and see anything, but the folks at the guard shack were really nice and let us take a bathroom stop and refill our water and to get some pictures. And it was a fun, whoops. That would be my cat walking by my webcam, knocking it off its mouth. Yeah, and it's actually, you can see the ocean from some of the higher parts around there, but it's just dry, dead desert all around. It's really wild to be near the ocean and be also in the desert. And it's, when people compare the Atacama Desert to Mars, you really get an understanding why when you actually drive through it. We pulled off the road at one point just to kind of absorb the environment. And we were the only car that had passed us, that we'd been around for a while. And it was absolutely the purest silence that I've ever experienced. There was no animal sounds. There was no, not really any air moving. There was, actually, the only sound we really heard was the wind. But when the wind kind of calmed down, it was just pure silence, which was absolutely wild. It is actually the driest. Let's see, I had some notes on my other side here. Here we go. Yeah, it's the driest true desert, tied with Antarctica for the McMurdo Dry Valley region of Antarctica. It has a double rain shadow with the Chile coastal mountains and the Andes mountains. So there's no rain coming from the east or the west. Average rainfall in the Atacama Desert is only 15 millimeters or 0.6 inches per year. And some places only see 1 to 3 millimeters or 4 to 6 hundredths of an inch in a year. And some places haven't had any appreciable rain for hundreds of years. It is an extremely dry desert. And it's so dry that there's a region of the desert where no life can be detected in the ground. There's not even any live soil. So NASA actually uses it as a Mars mission prep site for dealing with that environment, because it's not so different except for the higher amount of atmosphere. Yeah. So we stayed at this place called the Atacama Lodge, or the website is Space OBS for observatory.com. The guy who runs it, Alan Maury, he's a French expat who used to work for the European Southern Observatory and now instead lives in Chile and wanted to get out of the light pollution and stuff, and kind of runs this what I call a sunflower field of telescopes and a little kind of hotel outfit there. And you can go out and you can rent telescopes there, and you can stay on site in these cute little adobe cabins. And they've got running water and electricity from a solar farm he's got out there. And there is actually some internet because he's got a microwave antenna pointing to the town of San Pedro de Atacama to get some internet out there. So it's only about 20 to 30 minutes outside San Pedro de Atacama, so it's not hard to get to. Well, not too hard to get to. This is some of the vista. This is a volcano in the Andes Mountains here. And this is the sunflower field of telescopes that I was referring to. He's got all these Dobsonians, and he hosts, people come out by the busload he runs like a space tourist program. People come out and stargaze and he does it in 3 different languages, English, Spanish, and French, which he speaks all 3 of fluently and can switch between them without thinking. It's really impressive. And he's got some helpers that speak those languages as well. Obligatory picture of myself holding up the group tour sign with a small crescent moon up above my head. Now, we weren't able to get in right after the solar eclipse because a lot of other people were wanting to be out there as well, to include Fred Aspanak, we found out. And so we were there, and so we'd had some moon while we were there, but for only about half the night. And it was dark the rest of the night. So this is a moon-washed shot of us hanging out on one of the, I think this was the 24-inch Dobsonian, looking at some targets in the Milky Way. This is one of the tourist groups going through, doing the stargazing tour, again with a pretty bright moon out there. My alma mater, Washington State University, has this fly the flag kind of tradition. So I actually brought a flag with me and took a picture in front of this 45-inch Dobsonian that Alan was working on building and was almost done with, which we got to look through on our last night in the final hours before we were packing up to go to the airport. This 45-inch Dobsonian is the largest telescope for amateur use in South America. And he was almost done building it. There was still a couple more things he needed to do. He didn't have the counterweights right, so we kind of had to hold it up with our arms and let each other look through it. But boy, that was something to get to look through it. Here's a shot of that 45-inch in front of the Milky Way, low on the horizon. I was up until 4 a.m. to get this shot. That's Jupiter down here. And in order to see the Magellanic Clouds in that time of year in midwinter in the Southern Hemisphere, we did have to stay up pretty late and catch them as they were rising. So that's the large, I think the large, can't remember which one. One of the 2 Magellanic Clouds, which to the naked eye really do kind of look like clouds. It was really eerie. In this shot, we were looking at the Tarantula Nebula, which is this incredible, intricately detailed nebula up in the Magellanic Clouds. And at every focal length, there's something different to see. And you could see color. I mean, it's so bright. So getting to look at it this was the 27-inch Dobsonian, just a mind-boggling treat. Here's the picture of my astrophotography rig. So I'd get that set up and then go do lots of visual observing over the course of the night. I ended up borrowing, I was supposed to rent a telescope there for astro imaging. Ended up having some power problems. So Alan let me borrow his astro-modified Sony A7S with a Rokinon 135mm f2 lens, which I went on to go buy that same lens later because it was such an incredible lens, especially for only being $500. So I had that on there. Also loaded on there was my Nikon D5300 with a shorter lens. I swapped it out in and out for the long lens, doing various targets. This was with the 35mm lens that I put on. Yeah, I think that was with 35mm. Yeah, that I put on my D5300, and this is a single exposure, and this is the first one I took, and I just about fell over. I had to do a double take when I saw that flash up on the screen, because wow, I mean that's one exposure. I mean, it's probably about a 30-second exposure, and like, wow, it was just mind-boggling. I did get to use the rig that I was going to rent from him, which was a Takahashi 85mm and on a Skywatcher EQ6 Pro. I got to use that for a bit before we had the power issue. So this is a quick run on Centaurus A with my ZWO monochrome camera. Here's the stats for it, running, getting through just RG&B as quick as I could with taking just 3-minute exposures. I accidentally had the gain set to 10, so that didn't help. Usually I run it at Unity gain, which is 139, but I managed to get about 3 hours on it. and make a, you know, reasonable image. Having dark skies really helps, so you don't need as much exposure time. But I do have to say, my favorite images from the week weren't even the ones I took with my own gear. It was using Alan's Sony a7S and that Rokinon lens, which just blew me out of the water. So this is the Itacarina and the Running Chicken. So I've got several stuff labeled here. The Southern Pleiades, the Pearl Cluster, the Running Chicken Nebula is this area here. An NGC numbered open cluster, and of course Itacarina, which came out just this gorgeous red-pink color. Yeah, there's the stats. That is 21.5 minutes of exposure time for this, guys. 21 minutes! Dark skies do so much for you. The lens that he had, the Rokinon lens, was a Canon mounted lens that he had an adapter for the Sony, so it kind of like fell to the side a tiny bit. So my stars came out a little funky in one of the sides, but still a rather nice picture of the Large Magellanic Cloud here and all of its incredibly intricate knots of nebulosity. This was 2 hours of exposure. And here's the Small and Large Magellanic Cloud together on my own camera. This is with my 35mm f1.8 lens, stopped down a little bit. Accidentally ended up taking a whole bunch of 10-second exposures instead of the minute that I had wanted to do, so came out kind of weird. But seeing them together is pretty cool. And oh, this is 47 Tucanae, which is another incredible globular cluster that you can see from down there, right next to the Small Magellanic Cloud. More shots with my own gear of the Milky Way. We have M7, an open cluster, Colander 316, the my mouse over here, the blown out Jupiter, and then of course one of my favorites, the Rho Ophiuchi region that I zoomed in on for a picture I've got coming up here. Again, here's the stats: 39 minutes on my own camera. Or sorry, an hour 47 on my own camera. This is again with the Sony and the Rokinon. Much better color, much better stars. This lens was like, yeah, I definitely bought one. It's worth having. And finally, my most triumphant image, in my opinion, that I'd say almost that I've ever taken is this image of the Rho Ophiuchi complex. I had to set it up in kind of this weird composition because Jupiter was just off the frame here and I didn't want it blowing out the image, but I actually kind of ended up liking this composition. It was a little bit different. It's a little off center, but got some really incredible detail out of that lens, out of that camera. And this is, I want to point out, this is a half an hour of exposure time. This is 58 30-second images. Like, dark skies, guys. I'm telling you, if you've not done astrophotography at a dark sky site, it's absolutely worth taking the trip out there, especially when you have a nice camera and a nice lens to do it with. Here's that 45-inch that we got to observe with in a daytime shot. It is just enormous, and he's actually building an even larger one now, 70-inch, I think, using a rejected reconnaissance satellite mirror that has a small nick, I think, on the edge of it. So not good enough for a satellite, plenty good for amateur astronomy. So yeah, the trip was absolutely incredible. And I say once in a lifetime, but actually I'm kind of making some soft plans to go back at some point, particularly to the Atacama Lodge and to those dark skies again, and bringing some of my better gear down now and doing it all over again. Sans solar eclipse, but getting this 2-for-1 deal with solar eclipse plus the Atacama Desert was simply incredible. And I highly recommend, if you have the opportunity to go to Chile, to go to the Atacama Desert, do it. It's absolutely wonderful. And that's what I got.
So Molly,
well, Molly, that's great. I'm ready to pack up and going out. So next time you're going to go, you're looking for companions, just sign me up. I mean, that is fantastic. I guess you really have to pack carefully to see what
Yes.
you're going to take down there, because it's not like you can take all your best gear and
Yeah, that's right. But Alan charged pretty reasonable rates for renting his telescopes for visual observing, and I talked him into letting me rent an astrophotography rig because I convinced him I knew what I was doing. Usually he doesn't, just because people, they'll spend the whole trip troubleshooting.
I didn't ask, how long was the eclipse? Like 2.5 minutes? Or?
Yeah, it was like two. It was almost the same length as the 2017 one here. It was like 238 or 242 or something like that. The exact number's not in my head anymore, but it's right around there.
So I remember the 217 eclipse, and where we gathered up a bunch of people. We had a few people who knew what they were doing. The rest were just curious people. And I imagine that's what you had there. There were a few people who knew, like yourself, what was going on, and the rest were just people interested in the eclipse. And what happened when the totality occurred? Everyone did the same thing. You hear this sound, everyone went, oh, like that. You just reverberated through the whole group. And I imagine that's what happened with you too. Everyone exhaled at once.
Yeah, I mean, it was my experience in 2017 and my experience in 2019 were very different from each other. In 2017, I was at the Astronomical League convention in Casper, Wyoming. So I went to one of their observing sites. I was there with a bunch of other astronomers, and it was dead silent during totality because everybody was looking through their equipment or just looking without equipment and really focusing on taking it in as much as possible. So it was very quiet with the other amateur astronomers. But in Chile, with all of just the regular folks who were with us, both foreigners and a lot of the locals, I was counting down the last 15 seconds or so, and you couldn't even hear me in the final 10 seconds because just this great shout went up in the final seconds, and it was a very different experience. There's people there crazy excited. There was people there who were like meditating and smoking I don't know what, and there was really just all kinds of people reacting in all kinds of ways. And yeah, just this great shout went up. I took some cell phone video as well, looking around just to capture.
Yeah, right. It's as interesting to watch all the people as it is your 2.5 minutes on the eclipse. Tim, are you doing questions?
I do. I have one left, Molly. Wanda was asking about your polar alignment, and since you talked about your polar alignment when you did the eclipse, I assume she means when you were doing the night sky, and how difficult was it to do it in the southern hemisphere?
Yeah, so I had a lot of trouble. My Skywatcher Star Adventurer actually has both the northern and southern alignment stars inside of its polar scope, but I just had a real hard time finding that W for octans. And I ended up, Alan came over, and he is of course a pro at it. So what he did, he had a laser pointer, and he used the laser pointer and kind of laid it on top of the mount to get it pointed roughly at, I think it's sigma octans. And because he knew how to find it with enough practice. And then he would go look inside of the polar scope to kind of get it critically aligned. So I ended up having to use his help at the beginning of the week, and then I just made extra sure not to touch it the rest of the week.
So you didn't try like a pole master or sharp cap or anything like that?
Set up to do it at that time. Nowadays I can do that because I have a guide scope set up on that rig, which I can use with sharp cap and use sharp cap's polar alignment routine. And I have done that on that mount now to some good success. But at that time, I wasn't set up to do that. But okay. Yes.
So how far south were you? 30 degrees south?
When we were up in the Atacama Desert, we were at 27 degrees. Yeah. So
your alignment is pretty low to the horizon.
Yeah, it was relatively low, but still high enough to be easy to see, especially because the area was pretty flat around where he was at. Yeah, I don't know. I think I said north latitude a lot during the talk. I meant south.
Yes, you did.
Yeah. I was thinking just never mind. It got flipped around in my head.
Any other questions, Tim?
Nope, that was all we had.
You know, you had a really fine audience and they stayed with you all the time.
Cool.
So I think people are starting to book their tickets to go to Chile. But I would imagine that without the kind of detailed planning that you did, it wouldn't be near as interesting for any astronomer or astrophotographer.
Yeah,
Really,
especially on the photography front, you gotta plan pretty carefully what targets are going to be up, what equipment what can you capture with the equipment that you're able to bring down, and but you know, a lot of and definitely going down with a list of targets and how to find them, like your finder charts and stuff like that. I wound up using my I use Sky Safari on my smartphone, and actually being a natural photographer, I'm not great at pointing Dobsonians, but what I did was I used the app on my phone that tells me the pitch, yaw, and roll of my phone, and I laid it on the back of one of the Dobsonians I was using. And in Sky Safari, I pulled up what the current altitude and azimuth of the target were that I was looking for. And I laid my phone down on it and I moved the scope to that altitude and azimuth, and then looked close up on the star map in Sky Safari until I was able to kind of star hop my way to the target from nearby. And actually found quite a lot of things that way, to include things like the Skull Nebula, which is quite dim. And I was so proud of myself for being able to point a Dobsonian without using GoTo.
I imagine there were enough really bright targets for your photography between the LMC and the SMC and I mean, everything in there that you probably could spend night after night and just point it kind of by eye.
Yeah, and to really maximize photography time, I would recommend using a color camera. I didn't have a color astro camera at the time, so I brought my monochrome. But color camera to maximize time and kind of stick to the brighter targets so that you don't have to get as much exposure time. Since it's so much darker there than, let's say, like my backyard, for example, I don't need nearly as much exposure time to get a target well. So we can kind of budget for that. But sticking to the brighter targets will let you maximize the time that you're down there.
Hey, Molly, one other late question came in. Was there any breathing issues? Saw a video with folks who had a breathing issue in the Atacama.
Yeah, so we were up at, oh Lord, what was it? Something like 6,000 or 7,000 feet, I think, up there. And, I mean, so, yeah, I would definitely say, so we did get some altitude sickness medicine at the pharmacy on the way into town, which helped because I got quite a lot of a headache and a little bit of altitude sickness. Even so the two older folks who were in our group, they didn't come up to the Atacama with us. They were just there for the solar eclipse part of the trip. So us slightly younger folks, we didn't have too much trouble, but we also weren't like, running around and stuff like that. So we just kind of took our time. We actually took naps in the middle of the night and ate food throughout the night to kind of stay charged. And having staying there enough nights to be able to acclimate is really helpful, because then you can get more out of the nights later in the week when you're able to stay up all night and have more energy. We didn't have any problems, but the altitude sickness medicine helped a lot.
So I imagine by the end of all this, you were pretty well sleep deprived.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yep. That is the life of an astronomer. Yeah, we did sleep in. We planned to not do too many daytime activities up in the Atacama Desert, just because we knew we were going to be staying up until the wee hours. And so we usually slept until about noon or so. But yeah, the flight home, it's usually, if you're going that kind of intercontinental distance, it's a red eye. So I just slept on the flight back to the States.
Another late question. What were the daytime and nighttime temperatures at the different places you visited?
Good question. So the daytime temperatures up as far north as we were in the Atacama Desert were actually pretty mild. I think I was walking around in like pants and a t-shirt or pants and a long sleeve shirt a lot of the time. Probably like in the 50s, 60s for the daytime highs. A little warmer in La Serena, I think, just because of its the ocean kind of having a bit of a warming effect. The nighttime temperatures did get pretty chilly. And we actually, because we were pretty limited and we were trying to pack 2 weeks worth of stuff and imaging gear into a checked bag and a carry-on, we actually bought coats in country instead of bringing coats with us. And that worked out really nice. We just got really cheap coats and then left them in donation bins on our way out. But I did bring like a hat and gloves because it would get down into the 30s at night, especially later in the night. And when you're up really late for many nights in a row, your body temperature regulation doesn't work so well. So I brought Under Armour and warm socks, and I wore my hiking boots, and I put on just layered up hat, gloves, because it did get pretty chilly at night up there.
Oh, we got everything, Tim?
I think that's it. Yep.
All right. Well, excellent presentation, Molly. I'm ready to pack. I'm ready to go to Chile.
I'm ready to go back now.
Yeah, Molly, next time you're in the Southern Hemisphere, if you look up at the Milky Way, there's the Aboriginals have constellations, but they're made up of the dark areas. There's one called Mu that stretches the entire length of what's overhead. It's quite impressive to see.
Yeah, definitely. Like some of the other, like when we were at the Pre-Columbian Art Museum, I think there was a part of that talked about the night sky and the indigenous culture with the night sky. And I got to go to Peru when I was in college, and I wrote a whole paper on the Inca and the night sky. And that's when I learned about how it was so dark that they had constellations in the dark places, just because there were so many stars around the Milky Way.
Yeah.
So, really fascinating.
And like Omega Centauri, you can actually see that from downtown Melbourne. And Melbourne's a pretty bright place. I've seen it looking up going, that's impressive. Great talk.
Thank you.
Well, I think we're kind of done for the evening. Remember, everyone, next week, Tim and I are going to give like 20-minute presentations, and Arno is going to present his gorgeous galaxy video. So we have a pretty full program, and I think we got all the questions in. And again, great presentation, Molly. It was fascinating. Terry, good job tonight. You're a pro.
Yay.
Hey.
Okay.
So if you're ready, take us out.
Will do.